Shock teaching. Question: could you tell us a Sufi shock teaching technique? Answer: Sufi teaching techniques strongly feature the challenging statement made in order to cause a multiple effect upon the hearer. Mansur Hallaj notoriously said, "I am God," for precisely this reason. If someone in the West says, in slightly more contemporary language, "Hitler was a great man," the shock of this will cause the hearer to react instantly. Although Hitler died in 1945, almost universally regarded as a monster, the shock effect of calling him great had, for many people, worn off in a generation. A German teacher found that many young compatriots knew little about their former leader by 1977. Many of them, too, thought that he had in fact been a great man. Time, New York, 18th of April, 1977. In some people, it will make them realize for the first time what it is like to hear such a statement, what the people who used to say this were like. It will also cause some to realize that, perhaps, the question as to Hitler's greatness or otherwise is irrelevant to their own situation. It will make some realize that they are obsessed by this greatness or otherwise, revealing how their opinions can be triggered by the use of a phrase. In some, it will show almost any sequence of words can be used to program people and to cause belief or opposition. This is the technique sometimes used by Omar Khayyam and his school. Unless this is understood, of course, Khayyam cannot be understood, because some academics take his words at their face value. When he says, "Every violet is a beauty mole from some former beloved," they must imagine that this is reincarnation or poetic imagery, when it is in fact shock. The theory of reincarnation was a heresy in his culture. The Sufi literature is full of this kind of experiential teaching material. Its presence effectively filters out the superficial and the shallow. People are conditioned to like certain remarks and to dislike others. This is almost always useful until one gets to the point where hypocrisy takes advantage of the prevailing postures and enables people to manipulate situations and evade reality. Again, there are examples available in every culture in which people are not permitted by convention to say certain things which are true, because if they do, they are regarded as immodest, boastful, or hostile to others. This sort of preservation of the status quo may be good or it may be bad. Sometimes it produces tunnel vision. In order to act upon such situations, or to point out the limitations of coercive custom, some of the greatest Sufis have not shrunk from risking the most extreme opprobrium. I do not think that their contribution in this respect has yet been equalled. Silence and speech. One good example is found in Hujwiri's Revelation of the Veiled, Nicholson's translation, 1911. I have read in the anecdotes that one day when Abu Bakr Shibli, one of the most eminent of the ancient Sufis, was walking in the Karkh quarter of Baghdad, he heard an impostor saying, "Silence is better than speech." Shibli replied, "Thy silence is better than thy speech, but my speech is better than my silence, because thy speech is vanity and thy silence is an idle jest, whereas my silence is modesty and my speech is silence." Anyone who imagines that Shibli was acting in this way because he had a bad temper, or that he was impatient or straying beyond modesty, is in need of such Sufi shock teaching, since such an individual would not yet have learnt that there is a possibility that someone whom he regards, through conditioning, as out of order, may in reality be uttering what is in fact an exact description of prevailing circumstances. The main objection to supposedly immodest words is that they have a bad effect upon the person who speaks them, or teach observers to be immodest and not humble. In the case of such a person as Shibli, his status was, and is, such that the former is not possible, and the latter interpretation could not occur. since Shibli was known to be wholly voracious. This attitude may seem odd to people not accustomed to it. Oddness of appearance is not contradiction of fact, as the saying goes. It is conditioning as much as ignorance, which perpetuates the ignorance of humanity stressed by Khalili when he speaks of the world and humanity's place in it. Performers and spectators of the arena are we, bewildered at our work and at the world's, we little playthings in the hand of time, made to dance each time its tune is played. Emotional expectations. Question: why does a Sufi group go on, sometimes for years, reading books, meeting, and apparently not getting anything done, without any measurement of its progress and without a sense of how things are going? Answer: such a group has to wear out emotional expectations. It also has to provide circumstances in which the irrelevant and customary associations, characteristics brought in from other systems, may be displayed and observed, so that everyone can see what is central and what is not. If the members of the group are not seeing these things, it is not a Sufic group at all. Much of its visible work is that of a preparatory group. This does not mean that it might not be extremely important, for where else are you going to obtain this opportunity of living through and observing your reactions and those of others, outside of social groupings where the lessons are either obscured or twisted to provide superficial, tribal-type conclusions? If you refer again to the published narratives which illustrate the coming together of people, the effect of interchanges to show up unworthy or irrelevant behavior, or the uselessness of facile interpretation, you will find the material against which you can check the behavior of people in such a group, if you are in one. The main characteristic displayed by the questioner is that of a person who wants something, progress, or a sense of how things are going, without carrying on an active observation and digesting of experience happening in and to the group. In traditional terminology familiar to people of all cultures, used in this instance not as a reproach but as a technique, we have here too much greed ahead of capacity, too much dissatisfaction due to greed and false premises, too much laziness which gives rise to a person being a potential victim of an exploiter who might appear and promise automatic progress without effort or right alignment. Anyone who seeks to escape from his inherited culture's moral demands need not think that they may have no function as exercises. He has to relearn the other possible functions in traditional principles, and he can do this through more study of narrative and illustrative materials, and in participation in very preliminary group work, through more of such activity, not less. Finally, individual and subgroup progress is not always visible to all participants on demand. Obsessed with the world. Contrast this approach with that of the mechanical religionists who merely cultivate obsession. Fariduddin Attar gives a tale of the great woman Sufi Rabia when she was ill. A certain scholar came to see her, and, as he sat beside her bed, he repeated again and again arguments about the evils of the world. But Rabia could see through this, and told him that he obviously loved the world very much. People speak again and again of things which they love, whether they do so in pleasant or unpleasant terms. To be attached to something, favorably or otherwise, is the basic condition. If you had no truck with the world, Rabia reminded the man, you would say nothing about it, favorable or otherwise. Jumping to conclusions. Assumptions can stand between the student and what he might learn if these preconceptions are not correct or if they are not functional. The assumptions that spiritual paths should take this or that form, should be followed by this or that type of person, should belong to certain kinds of recognizable institution and so forth, These ideas not only block learning, they often transform it into a search for the expected diversion, and therefore, in reality, if not in appearance, towards becoming a part of the entertainment industry. To connect with people at the outside edge, so to speak, Eastern sages have grown beards and worn turbans. To point up the jumping to conclusions syndrome, others have behaved like lunatics. To alert those who are most teachable, yet others have not compromised with expectation to any real extent. And frauds and adventurers, to exploit the only too obvious assumptions, have never been slow to accord with them, to tell people what they want to hear. If you cannot question your assumptions, you must stand up to be counted among the people of whom some may be right, but who include a large number of people, conditioned to bigotry, who must be wrong. Perhaps worth thinking about is the illustrative test, which was recently applied to over 200 people who had been attracted to a certain spiritual teaching. They were given a number of statements and literary extracts and asked which of them were genuine and which not. Over 85% of these people got the answers wrong. They identified the spurious documents and statements as genuine. This indicated at least two things. One, that these people, for the most part, had not been attracted to the teaching through any ability to discern its legitimacy. And two, that since most of them had rejected the real materials, the likelihood was that they would eventually reject the teaching materials and procedures of the genuine school, since they displayed an overwhelming appreciation of the spurious as authentic. One of the commonest assumptions among people who only imagine what a real teaching might be is connected with initiation. All over the world, you will find people willing and anxious to initiate others into spiritual schools. But as the procedure is still preserved among the Sufis, initiation, the pledge of fealty to a teacher, only takes place several years after his admission to the order of dervishes. This is because, until the student knows enough, and until he has learned something, he cannot truly commit himself to the deep studies. To get him to engage himself to follow a path while he is still not capable of it is a real mark of ignorance or imposture. The Christian in Mecca. On the other hand, someone may be ready to learn and to understand when he is regarded by externalist tests as being quite unsuitable. The great Shibli one day made this very clear in a story which contains several interesting features. Shibli announced one day in Baghdad that he wanted 1,000 dirhams for shoes for the poor for the pilgrimage to Mecca. A certain Christian offered the money, providing that he would be allowed to accompany the caravan. Shibli told him that only Muslims could make the journey, so the Christian offered to come as a pack animal, from whom no affirmation of faith was required. So they set off, with the Christian in harness. At each stage he cleared the ground for the pilgrims. When they arrived at the great mosque, Shibli told the Christian that he was not permitted to enter the precincts of the Kaaba. The Christian prayed that he might be allowed to enter. Then a voice was heard, inviting the Christian in. Jumping to conclusions is one of the greatest barriers to learning, though not to actions which make people imagine that they have verified something or made discoveries. How to increase speed. Mullah Nasruddin went one day to a shipyard. Seeing a fire, which he had not expected to be associated with the sea, he asked a workman what it was for. "We make tar," said the other man, "and cover the cracks in the underside of the boat. That makes the vessel go faster." The mullah went straight home and made a bonfire. Then he tied up his donkey and melted some tar in a pan. As soon as he brought the smoking tar near the animal, it broke loose and ran like the wind. "It works all right," said Mullah Nasruddin. The Rosary and the Robe. Question: what is the origin of the belief that the holy man is, for example, constantly practicing austerities, should be dressed in rags, avoids contamination, and so on? Answer: this is the easiest of all questions to answer. You could probably have seen that yourself if you had phrased it differently. For the benefit of those who cannot answer it, the origin is in the observation of the initial austerities, etc., visibly practiced by the devout. Because they have no information as to the purpose, stage of development, or nature of procedure of such an individual, outward observers imagine that this must automatically represent the essential and invariable behavior of the illuminate and his random spectators who are in a mimetic mood. It is as if an unthinking person were to see the arm-waving of a railway signalman in training and extrapolate from that the belief that all railwaymen must at all times, or to become experts, wave their arms, and if the man at this level does this, the top man must do it, and perhaps if he does, twice as auspiciously. Malobservation, facile assumptions, mechanical reproduction of activities based on incomplete data, in any area of human activity or learning spell failure, not success. If you doubt this, test it. Plenty of organizations bear these marks. So, in order to correct basic mistakes, we must be able to conceive that there might be mistakes. When this is done, further mistakes and useless procedures may be avoided. In place of becoming a consumer of emotional stimuli while concurrently imagining that one is experiencing spirituality, the student must be prepared to attempt those things which are prescribed for him. Both practice and test in the Sufi way are real ones. Those which center upon appearance and fads are false ones. One such test, for those who have developed a taste for absurdities, is to adopt and maintain a normal life. God was dead. Among the Sufis there is a story, related by Attar, of a dervish who applied to enter a monastery wearing black. When he was asked by Ibn Kafif, who died about 1,000 years ago, why he was in mourning, he answered that his God was dead. The people there expelled him 40 times before they absorbed the fact that his God, that which he had worshipped, had been his secondary self, the conditioned personality. Hussein ibn Mansur, asked by someone, "Who is a Sufi?" answered, "The one whose essence is single."